We have 10 days to make a multiplayer game.
Let's find out what we can make.
I start on day 1 by implementing the movement and the camera follow. And that's actually it. It doesn't sound like a lot, but honestly I'm pretty happy with the results. Since we're working on a multiplayer game for the web, things are a bit tricky. So anyway, we're using Quantum. It's an ECS-based framework sitting on top of Unity, so coding is a bit different. And even super simple things like making our character face in the moving direction can sometimes take up so much time.
We are big fans of Stickman, so it's an easy choice to use one for our character. One thing I really like about Stickman is that modeling them doesn't take much time, which is perfect because we only have 10 days. For the animation, we usually twist and tweak some pre-made animations from Mixamo, for example, but this time we are making all the animations from scratch inside Blender. First, I need to set up a rig, basically adding bones to our model. I'm using inverse kinematics, so I can easily move the feet or hands, and the rest follows automatically. Now the rig is done, and that's all it on day 1. So on day 2, I jump into creating some animations. I start with the running animation. The character will be running with a weapon, so we practically just need to animate the legs. It took a few tries, and by a few tries I mean almost the whole day, to get the animation feel right. It's still not perfect, but we will change it later. After that, I make an idle animation, the jump, which is practically just a pose of the character, and one for the landing.
Day 2 is a bit more exciting because I start implementing the shooting mechanic, which obviously works right out of the box. The trail of the bullets look a bit weird sometimes because we use object pooling, which basically just means we reuse our objects instead of spawning and destroying them all the time. I also think that this is a quantum issue where the entity or the bullet gets interpolated and the trail renderer does weird stuff. So instead of using a trail renderer, we just use a line renderer. And actually the line is just fixed, so we could have used a sprite for that. But I already wasted too much time on this. It's a bit strange to just spawn bullets out of nowhere, so we add our first gun to the game. I add a muzzle particle and a recoil effect to the gun. I also add the pushback when the player shoots to avoid situations where a player just keeps running and shooting. And to make the shooting more impactful, we add a screen shake. Though later we will change it so the shake happens when the player gets hit, which actually makes much more sense. The plan is to have more than one weapon in the game, but before working on any gameplay mechanic or logic, like collecting weapons, implementing different stats, I keep polishing the game because, well, I really like working on these little things, so I make a weapon draw animation. Because it's better to have a small polished game than a massive unpolished game, right? Well, yes, but we also need some kind of gameplay loop. Right now we can only run and shoot, and it doesn't look that polished either, so to sum up, at the end of day 2 we have only
Day 3 is about experimenting with the game's look. At the beginning, we wanted to give the game a notebook vibe, kind of a white lined paper style with a more abstract feel. Then we decided to keep the notebook style but give it a platform a bit more of a grounded look. I make some platforms and import them into Unity to better test the look, but I don't like how it feels. We kept thinking and come up with the idea of making rooftops, which I plan to do tomorrow.
Today I start with adding basic logic like a health bar and damage numbers. It's also time to replace the capsule with our Stickman and get the animations working. We have a double jump, but right now it doesn't feel like you're actually double jumping, so we just replay the animation. And simple things like this sometimes take so much time, not because they are super complicated to implement, but because you need to have the idea. We add a shader to make the characters blink white when they take damage, and we also add a notification. We want to add moving platforms, and although it sounds like you just drop them into the game, to make this work we actually have to write a script that keeps track of the platform the player stands on and then applies this movement to our character controller. We also add one-way platforms where players can jump through from beneath, and springs or jump pads, or I don't know what this is supposed to be, something that pushes players up. And slowly it's starting to feel like a game. Day 4 starts with new visuals, which we won't use for the final game. And although we are building a multiplayer game, it's super important to have bots for times when not enough players are online. So I spent almost a whole day on them. They basically just walk towards the nearest player, run away if a player is too close, jump randomly around, and shoot at random intervals. So they are pretty dumb, but I guess that's good enough for now. And one really nice thing about Quantum is that I haven't written a single line of netcode or anything besides the single player game logic, But we already have a working multiplayer setup. So day 4 is also the first time Roxy and I test the game, or however you want to call it.
On day 4, the first thing I do is search for some inspiration and spend the day creating some buildings and platforms. For the background, I make some clouds and other buildings in grayscale, so it's easier to change the colors in Unity.
The next thing we add is collectible shields and weapons, although we won't use the shields later in the game anyway. The collectible weapons have a limited amount of bullets and deal more damage, shoot faster, some shoot multiple bullets at once, and they all have different pushback forces.
On day 5, I work almost the whole day on creating the environment and the first draft of the level. I want to add a parallax effect, which means the background buildings will move a bit with the camera or player, so it feels more dynamic and has depth. So we need some code for that, but my coding skills are pretty much non-existent and my to-do list is already long. So I asked GPT for help and it works, and I really like how it looks now.
And you might be asking why we only have 10 days to make the game, because we're making a game for a multiplayer web game jam with the theme Action. On day 6 I work on a flamethrower, which, again, we will not use in our final game. So I just waste half a day on nothing, but that's okay, we still have some time left. The other half of the day I spent adding an in-game leaderboard and a round timer. And to add a bit more randomness to the game, we also add critical hits.
The game is starting to take shape, but the UI is still missing. I like the bottom style from our last game. I think the black outlines will fit here too. So I'm keeping that look, but I'm changing the shape to be less round. I don't know, it just feels more like an action game that way.
Right now, when the time is up, we just disappear and start over again. That's why on day 7 we add the level end screen. And it looks pretty ugly, sorry to your eyes for this shiny color. I don't know why I used that color, but we add a placeholder for player positions and stats like damage and so on. There's also a timer that automatically restarts the next round. Not sure if this will stay like this forever, but we don't have that much time left and there are still tons of things to do. I mean, look at this.
I work on the level end screen that Mike made previously. For that, we need some extra animation. So we make one kind of celebration animation for when players win and another one that's a bit sad for when they don't. It's day 8, I import some guns from our game Warsi Defense. Now that we have the weapons, we need to tweak the animations a bit. We can let the players run around holding a machine gun like this. We are keeping things simple and just adjusting the arm positions. We apply the same fixes to the other animations too.
I worked on the guns logic because we have different sounds and stats for each weapon. Actually, the core loop is almost done and we still have some time to polish the game. There's not much feedback when you hit other players, so we add some particles to make it more juicy.
When players get eliminated, they just disappear, so we think it would be fun if the Stickman breaks into parts when eliminated. Now, when players get eliminated, we spawn the Stickman part, and that's actually already the end of day 9.
So day 10 of 10 is all about playtesting and making the actual level of the game. We almost go insane because our colliders don't work, or at least that's what we think. But since our game is in 2D, especially the colliders, and we're using an orthographic camera, we didn't notice that we had just placed our platforms on the wrong seat position. Anyway, after freaking out, we sometimes get a bit lost in the level, not knowing where the others are. So, to help players avoid searching for each other, we add indicators at the edges of the screen. We also have to add an offset to avoid overlapping indicators. We submitted the game, there are still like 3 hours and a few bugs left. The game is still not published, so now the judges will evaluate every submission and then they will pick the winners. So if you want to know how we continue, our game will perform, make sure to subscribe. Also check out the game in the link in the description, hit the like button,